Nixon, all those in favor, motion is carried. And I need a motion to adopt the minutes of the regular council meeting of August 28th. Councillor English, Councillor Souls, all those in favor, motion is carried. And the adoption of the minutes of the special council meeting of September the 5th. Councillor English and Councillor Brothers, all those in favor, motion is carried. Is there any business arising from the minutes of the regular meeting of August 28th? And is there any other business other than what I brought forward on the special meeting of September the 5th? So I want to talk about me asking council to reconsider and vote on second reading as amended as pursuant to section 131. This has to do with the development cost charge bylaw 2234 that in second reading that we amended. Now, I get asked 2 or 3 times a year to reconsider a vote that council has made, and I have, due to some comments that I've seen that I do not have the right to do this. Well, actually I do. 2 members of council that voted against any motion have the right to ask to bring it back to the table as well. So I just wanted to clarify that before I start. But when I get asked, I have certain criteria that I ask myself and I apply it to what happened with the vote on September the 5th. How many people were in attendance? 6, not a full contingent of 7. How did the vote go? It was a split vote, 3 in favor, 3 against. What were some of the comments? Did council have all the information that I feel that it needed to make a decision? Did it have the information of what the repercussions of their vote would be? And this was a vote in second reading to keep the development cost charge bylaw on the table so that council could look at getting more information, which is one of the comments that I heard, getting more feedback from the public. We've heard lots from the development community, but we have not heard a lot from the regular taxpayer or the user. Are the costs too high that are being applied to the local user taxpayer? And if the vote had kept the motion or the bylaw moving forward, there would have been opportunities for council to ask those questions, seek more information, and but that opportunity was lost when the vote was tied and the bylaw was turned down. So these are the things that I look at when I'm asked to reconsider a vote. And I can tell you that I'm sure everybody around the table here has spent a considerable amount of time thinking about what they should be doing or not doing. And I have spent a lot of time mulling this over because I was asked by several people to bring this back for reconsideration. And I've been mulling this over for a couple of weeks now. And I guess what I have to look at is what is the benefit of bringing it back? And the benefit is keeping the bylaw alive. What do I feel is the vote that's going to be around the table? And I'm never guaranteed of what that vote is going to be. The other things that I have to consider is that regardless of how the vote goes, there's going to be members of council that I feel are not going to be voting in favor. And if it does pass, it's going to be a split council that is going to be asked to look at the development cost charge bylaw again, go back to the table and come up with ideas and options to move it forward. We are going to be torturing staff and maybe consultants more with questions and information. We're going to be torturing the public probably a little bit more. But one of the biggest concerns that I have is that the development cost charge bylaw, we're here at this table to represent the whole community. And the whole community I don't think has spent the time to fully understand. I think a lot of people have. And the reason why they don't is because they expect that city council will do that for them and look after the interests of the whole community. And that's what I see my job as, and I see council's job, and so that's the responsibility that's given to us. But because the vote was controversial with a split vote, I would be looking for and hoping for a strong mandate for this to be moving forward. And I have to say that I am not feeling 100% confident that there is a strong mandate to move this bylaw forward. So I unfortunately have decided that I am not going to bring this motion back to the table for reconsideration. And I apologize to the community because I think it's the wrong decision. And we are not being respectful of the whole taxpayer. And I got to say that this is exactly the decision that I didn't want to be making. I didn't want to have at this table because I think that we are doing a disservice to the whole community. And I know the development community views themselves as being disserviced, but I disagree. I disagree with the way that that this has been fought out in the community, and this is not the Revelstoke that I was a part of for years. And I think that there's a lot of people in the community that are disappointed in the way that this thing has gone down. And so a lot of people are asking for this to go to the next council. It will be going to the next council. I would have liked it going to the next council with some, with all the thought, effort, and time and money that this council, staff, and consultants have spent on it. But again, I'm not feeling confident enough to do that. And so I am going to leave it at that. I'm not sure if anybody on council wishes to make a comment. Councillor Sells.
Your Worship, I just want to make this statement. I support your decision to leave this DCC issue to the next council. If I'm elected, I promise that the new council will address this issue and work with the staff and the community for the betterment of all taxpayers. I firmly believe we cannot turn our back on the average resident and the seniors of our community to foot the bill for the growth moving forward. Development will have to pay their fair share as well. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Orlando?
Yeah, Your Worship, I just like to express that I really, we can see, you've struggled over this decision here, and that, the DCC bylaw is really important to you, and you have strong feelings about it. I agree that getting it in place is really important, and I'd like to thank you for your, effort. So as you mentioned, for your looking out for the whole community and the feeling that this is the right bylaw to move forward. I do agree with Councillor Souls that this process needs to be addressed quickly, and I really would like to see whoever is on the new council deal with it when they can, hopefully within the first year, and able to use the baseline material that has baseline studies that have been done related to this process.
This matter is now over. I'm allowed to bring it back once, and I'm deciding I'm not going to. And I have 30 days that I can do it. I do not envision that on the next meeting, the 25th, that this will be coming back to the table. DCC bylaw is now over. People are welcome to stay. They can join us for a cannabis meeting, or they can exit. I'm very happy about it.
You did it.
Godspeed, Gary. Godspeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to get back to the meeting, if that's all right. Announcements from the mayor. I wanted to, for those people that are watching live on Facebook, to remind them that the emergency food drive is on this evening. And of course, the time to declare if you're going to be a candidate in the upcoming election was closed on Friday, and I would like to congratulate and thank the 12 people that put their name forward to run for council, and the 2 people that are put their name forward to run for mayor, as well as regional district and school trustee. And I can guarantee you that not everything will, in the next 4 years, will go like the development and cost charge bylaw has gone through in the last few months. There is actually a lot of fun and enjoyment and learning things around this table. And again, I want to thank and congratulate those people that are putting their name forward. We're into bylaws. We have a finance tax exemption bylaw 2235. Mr. Nixon.
I'll bring this forward, that the 2019 property tax exemption bylaw number 2235 be read a first, second, and third time.
Motion by Councillor Nixon, seconded by Councillor Souls. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Nixon.
Your worship, I just want to thank our young finance assistant director, Shiana Moore, for working with DC Assessment and working with approval with the Cranbrook officer, Jonathan O'Grady, who has allowed us to give permissive taxation exemption to the Legion, full taxation exemption to the
Oh,
Legion.
nice.
This is something I've been asking for 2 years, so thank you for that. And also the Avalanche Canada coming forward today for tax exemption. So, good news.
We have a motion on the floor. Any more comments or discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. And we have a presentation on cannabis. Mr. Sliturge.
So this presentation was largely put together by our consultant, Maren, who's with Meraki Community Planning. So I want to thank her in her absence. She is not here, so any questions that I'm not able to answer, which would probably be around provincial and federal legislation, I can get you an answer later if you want, or you can email me, or it can be addressed at the public hearing. So that said, I'll go through a little bit of background here and then go through the 4 bylaws that are in front of you for amendment. The intention with this whole cannabis process was to develop our own Revelstoke-specific regulations for businesses and consumption in preparation for Canada-wide legalization, which will take effect on October 17th. Part of that's replacing our interim prohibition in the zoning bylaw. And we wanted to ensure that this process and the regulations considered the needs and input of Revelstoke residents. With cannabis, this is trickled down from the feds. So the federal role in all of this is to regulate production of cannabis, so the growing of it. It's packaging, it's advertising, very similar to how they do with cigarettes. They'll also set standards for health and safety, and that goes with what goes into the product, how it's grown, the inputs along the way, how it's processed. They're in charge of establishing the legislation behind criminal prohibitions, so what you're allowed to possess. That will become an RCMP issue. Unlawful distribution includes giving product to youth, crossing the border, things like that. That's all under federal jurisdiction. They broadly control access, so they've set the limits on what an individual can carry for this soon-to-be legal product. So it's 30 grams of dried, and then there is limits on what that translates to in terms of fresh or oils. So those will all be legal substances. And the federal legislation also allows for growing up to 4 plants personally at home for your own use, so that does not constitute a production use. There's a lot of federal regulation around access to youth, so they set limits on vending machines, the type of packaging. They'll regulate that it can't appeal to youth, so it's similar to smoking again, and cigarette packaging. And then there's also public awareness campaigns surrounding health and reasonable limits with respect to that the feds do as well. Provincial government sets the legal age, so in BC that's going to be 19. Federally it's 18, so provinces can choose to establish what they wanted. They can go higher. The province will oversee retail sales, similar to how liquor stores are done. The liquor distribution branch will operate publicly owned retail stores, just like a BC liquor store. There's also the option for privately owned stores. The liquor and cannabis regulation branch will manage licensing, similar to how they manage licenses for private liquor stores. And the province is also doing training for local RCMP detachments. Just with respect to the licensing process, I'll go through that in detail later, but how we approve liquor primaries right now will effectively be how we approve cannabis retail stores. So an applicant will go to the province, they'll make an application, they'll have a process to go through. That will get referred to the local government, at which time it will be brought to council for consideration. So part of this presentation is that I'm going to tell you all of the zones that we're suggesting that cannabis retail locations be allowed in, but that doesn't mean that the applicants or the owners or the licensees will not have to go through an additional process. So there's a second step of approval that will happen once that federal date passes and once people start seizing the opportunity, I guess. Municipal regulations. So this is where we can establish our own local zoning rules. We can say where they can be and where it can't be. We can limit hours through our zoning bylaw and our business licensing bylaw or other conditions, which we'll talk about. We can restrict where it may be consumed. That's largely done through nuisance and clean air bylaws. And we can charge application fees for the process, and we can charge business licensing fees for those who are going to come in and apply for business license. I just have a note here that production facilities is now limited to outdoor production. The ALC is involved with this. We only have 2 ALR parcels in Revelstoke, so that's going to be a bit of a moot issue. We don't have the climate for outdoor growing here, so any production that we do see will be indoors. I'll get to that later. What are other municipalities doing? Largely, they're establishing this as a permitted use in commercial retail zones and in stores. They're also establishing production in industrial lands and in the ALR. They are establishing buffers from facilities that might cater to youth, such as schools, parks, daycares, youth centers. Those distances will range from 80 meters to 400 meters, depending on the municipality and the size of the municipality. There's often discussion about how close cannabis businesses should be to each other. That is not regulated at the provincial level. Some municipalities are doing anywhere from 100 to 400 meters. Fees are all over the place. City of Vancouver is $30,000 for a business license. We are not going that high, I'll just say that right now. Other issues that have come up in other places are setbacks from property lines, interfaces between production and residential uses, establishing maximum caps on number of stores, and restrictions on consumption in public places. These are all things that we did consider in our process. I'll go through that. So part of this was doing some community engagement. There was information available on the website. There was a frequently asked questions document that you all have a copy of. It was broadcast through Facebook and all these other media outlets you see there. We had some posters in City Hall and around the community. The Chamber of Commerce assisted, as well as Community Futures, in distributing information. Internally, we had a staff working group. We did a community survey that was available in paper and digital forms. Staff consulted with the Social Development Committee and the Health Advisory Committee, and it's also been sent to the Advisory Planning Committee and the Economic Development Committee. We had 857 surveys, That's about 15% of the population that's over the age of 18, so that's very, very, very good turnout. 94% of those people were permanent residents, mostly 25 to 44. 25% were existing business owners, which is interesting. More interesting is that 26% of those 857 said they were interested in opening a business. 78% of people who responded said they were in support of cannabis stores, and 66% indicated that they were happy with having production facilities here. Big concern was odor and smoking in public. 46% were indicated that they weren't at all concerned with the legalization. That was question 5. Sorry, I should say survey. Question 5 in the package. That was page 81 on your agenda package. That was a lister top 3 concerns with legalization. So some people listed their top 3, and some just said, I'm not concerned at all. So that's an interesting result. There was concern about buffering between new cannabis businesses and from sites that might cater to youth. And the buffers between stores wasn't often thing that came up. There's generally a concern for clustering of these stores. So just going through some of these questions really quickly. Do you support retail storefront cannabis? Overwhelmingly yes, from those 857 people. Do you support production? Yes, both indoor and outdoor. So again, overwhelming support. Locations for retail stores, generally in existing commercial locations. So Big Eddy, Central Revelstoke. I can't read those on my packages here, but it's
Central business areas that allow liquor and all commercial zones.
Thank you. Yeah, so there was a common thread, and that was a feedback from folks suggesting that we treat this similarly to liquor. So that's one of the arguments. Production areas, largely people gave us feedback saying put them in industrial areas and in agricultural areas. This was a split answer. Should we set a limit on the number of stores? Some said yes, some went no, let the market decide. I'll speak about that a little bit later. We have the ability to regulate the number of production facilities. A little bit different, let the market decide. I'll speak to that again a little bit afterwards. And then we gave folks the option to tell us how far we should put these new stores from parks and areas catering to youth. Most common answer was 300. The caption there on the right from a resident is kind of indicative of the feedback that we were getting, which was saying so long as we keep them far enough away from daycare and youth, it's probably going to set limits in other ways, just because of the practicalities of available stores and available land. So I'll get into that too when I show you some maps. And again, minimum distance between stores. Some suggested 1 kilometer, so the province has a limit as to how far away liquor stores can be from each other. And then others said no minimum distance. So that was again a little bit of a split vote, occupying the most respondents there. There's some practicalities that will deal with that for us. And again, the federal government has said that you can grow up to 4 plants on your property. They have to be at a site. We've seen general support from the community for that. There was the option to regulate that out or restrict that as being an option, but given this result and in consultation with the RCMP, it's going to be fine for folks to grow up to 4 plants in their backyards, basically behind a fence. So with that said, we've come up with a number of zones in our existing zoning bylaw that would have retail sales of cannabis as a permitted use. These are largely all centered on the downtown core. There's a couple parcels, zone C7 and C11, that are outside of the downtown core, but again, through this process, applicants will have to apply to the province and then again apply to the city, and it will be brought to council for consideration. We've excluded the other zones largely because they were only located in what are predominantly residential areas, and based on the feedback found that this was something that the public wanted to see more in the central business district than outlying areas. That's just repeating what I said. We did choose a 100-meter buffer between stores for the downtown core, and we chose a 300-meter buffer between stores for commercial areas outside of that. We've also chosen a 100-meter buffer from sites that are frequented by children and youth, so that's all parks, all schools, all youth centers, all daycares. And the next couple slides are going to demonstrate why. So this shows all the parcels in blue are all of the parcels that would have permissive commercial zoning for a retail store. So we've got some C7, which is kind of our service, commercial, light industrial zones concentrated over here. This is our highway commercial zone, which is C4, also concentrated around here. And this is more C7. These areas in the central core are the C1s and C2s, which is the central business district. Parks, schools, and a smattering of daycare facilities and youth facilities. The red area is the no-go zone, so that's the 100-meter buffer. So anywhere within any one of those blue zones, one could potentially open up a cannabis retail store.
And wherever one goes in, then it's 100 meters from the next one.
Yeah, and I'm going to show you an example of that.
Okay, show us an example of that.
That's what would happen if we did a 300-meter buffer from parks and schools, which is what the community suggested. It's a little restrictive, so we dialed it back a bit.
And I did ask to have the mayor's building excluded on there, like I would rather the red went over top of that, it would look better.
So this is a reflection of what the regulations will allow. So the green buffers in the center are the 100-meter buffers from store to store. So we've placed a bunch of little logos there, which would indicate locations where you could operate a store. So we don't foresee there being that many stores in town, that it's unlikely the market will bear it, but it allows for a great degree of flexibility in where folks choosing to undertake a new business can locate. The first store will establish the 100-meter buffering from store to store to store. Outside of the downtown core, this is a 300-meter buffer from store to store. So in the Big Eddy, for example, there's a lot of lands that have permissive zoning, hypothetically, for these stores, but they're also mixed in with predominantly residential neighborhoods. So realistically, the most you'll see in the Big Eddy is going to be 2 stores. Same with over here. And that's subject to availability of land, availability of retail space, and again, council's decision-making through the referral process from the province. For production facilities, we've chosen the M1 and M2 zones. And we've also built in a setback of 15 meters from any property line where there might be a residence next door. There's other concerns with production that I'm going to get into later on in this presentation. For those, we avoided M3, that's our heavy industrial, to preserve those for core services like cement production, waste, recycling, gravel extraction. There was community support for production in industrial areas, so we wanted to make sure that we did accommodate that. Again, very little agricultural land and the 15-meter setback I mentioned. There's a map showing all of the possible production facilities in the blue parcels. So there's opportunities there for new businesses to locate. In conversation with our consultant, she's advised us that it's unlikely we're going to get more than one, if one. So there's some flexibility here. We've also looked at the possibility of future rezonings in these lands up here, which are zoned RR60. So that's kind of a holdover zone from when those lands were brought into the city from the regional district. You can build everything from an airport to a waste disposal site, so that would be on a case-by-case basis. But we opted not to include production in all of these lands and rather deal with that on a one-off basis. For business licensing, a question that arose was how should we regulate the hours of operation of these stores? By and large, the public was okay with that being same as liquor stores. That's what we're going to do. That's what we're recommending, at least. From 9 to 11, same as liquor stores. For a business license, once someone goes to the province and gets their approval, they'll have to provide us with that approval. They'll have to confirm for us their hours of operation, and then we'll have other documents required by the building inspector, which might be fire escape plan and security measures. But by and large, it's going to be building code issues. Production facilities are going to be similar. They'll have to provide their license to operate. They will need to give us a report on a discharge of any odor into the air and noise, and into the sanitary sewer, the storm sewer and streams. That will need to be provided by a professional engineer. As well, an odor assessment report provided by a qualified professional that specializes in air quality that assures us that there will not be any release of unwanted nuisance odors. That is built into the business licensing bylaw as an annual update. So for every year that they renew their business license, they'll need to re-provide that report. There has been complaints in facilities in the Lower Mainland that right now are producing for medical marijuana of odor, and we wanted to make sure that we avoided that, given that we do have industrial limits where production facilities could be located close to residences. Hours for the stores are consistent with the survey. And that's just a notice that Marin put in here justifying the measures taken to reduce odor. Once a business license is issued, it's very difficult to enforce these kinds of nuisances, so having this mandatory requirement be put in place in advance of issuing a business license will avoid that kind of negative impact on the surrounding neighbors. And just some reflection of comments we got in the survey. This is indicative of many. Please treat this change similar to other commercial businesses. The information should be similar to liquor stores. So we're not trying to make this onerous. The intent is to welcome these new businesses into the community with the same degree of oversight with other businesses. I'm going to skip that one. Clean air bylaw. So what we heard from the public largely was a focus on smell, odors, and consumption in public. Other concerns were youth access to cannabis in parks and in community centers, public smoking. A lot of comments about smoking of cannabis in the street, on the sidewalk. It's a difficult issue to deal with because of the enforcement challenges behind it. There's a question here asking about where smoking and vaping should be prohibited. Let the province decide. We've taken a little bit more of a restrictive approach on this one just to avoid these complaints in public. We're recommending that the Clean Air Bylaw be amended to prohibit the consumption of cannabis in all areas of parks, and that includes roads and parking lots, but not including a rented campsite in a public park. So that would apply to Williamson Lake. So similar to, you go camping in a BC park, you're not allowed to carry open alcohol down the roads, on the beach, in the playground, but you can consume it in your site. Cannabis would be the same within the city's campground. The current Clean Air Bylaw does allow smoking on public roads. That's not going to change. This only deals with cannabis and roads within, and I'm going to repeat myself, roads within parks and parking lots within parks. Moving on, so you've got recommendations in front of you for the amendment of 4 bylaws. That is the zoning amendment bylaw, the business license amendment bylaw, the fees and charges amendment bylaw, and the clean air amendment bylaw. I didn't go over the fees and charges just to save time here, but I can tell you it's in your package. They are largely the same as the fees and charges for liquor licensing and liquor approvals process. So
And if you don't mind, I just want to ask a question going back to the campground.
yeah.
So what if I heard it properly, is that if you're in your campsite, you can smoke cannabis?
Yeah.
Okay, and I guess the concern that I have is that the problem with a campsite is that you're cheek to jowl to everybody else. You're within so many meters of a park. I'm talking about Williamson's Lake. You're so many meters within a park where it's a kid's playground that probably when you go back to the other slide saying what is it, 100 meters from a park, 150, 300, what is it from a park? 300? You would be within that 100 meters, so I guess I have a little bit of a concern with that, is that I think that the campground should be classified as a park, and the whole thing should be no cannabis, because within 100 meters, you could have 50 people camping there.
That's retail sale, not use.
Well, I'm talking about use in the campground is what I'm talking about.
There's no buffers for use.
Sorry?
There's no buffer for use. Except drinking beer in the campground.
Part of the discussion surrounding
Well,
that.
okay, so just hang on a second. You said that there's no buffer for use, but don't we have a clean air bylaw that prohibits smoking in park?
Yes, playgrounds and parks.
Okay. I'm already confused enough.
To
Anyways, I don't know. I just see it as an issue. Trevor.
Can someone smoke a cigarette at Williamson Lake in their campground?
Yes, they can.
Yes, I'm not fine with that.
That's why, and it's related to clean air, and clean air is the cigarette and then the cannabis. It's hard.
And I also find it difficult to compare a tobacco cigarette and a marijuana cigarette as the same thing. And anyways, I throw it out there. And this, we are going to a public hearing, and we may hear about this, and I may bring it up again, and we'll just see. But I think that the whole thing should be cannabis-free, myself.
It's very difficult to strike a balance. One of the conversations that was had about smoking cigarettes versus cannabis in the parking lots, because the clean air bylaw will still allow for cigarettes in the parking lots, but cannabis not, is that it's an influential, it's a drug. It's a mind-altering drug, so you can't drink liquor in the parking lot. It's open consumption. So it was chosen to take that route with cannabis as well. But again, smoking in a campground is permitted, so we opted for allowing cannabis in the campground because you're within your own personal space, as if you're in your own personal space in your home. That was the line of thinking. It's very difficult to strike a balance. I'm not arguing with this. So there is a public hearing, and we can solicit more feedback from the public.
Be interesting what BC Parks and what their attitude is on their campsites, if that would, and knowing that our campsites are closer, higher density than a BC Park campsite is.
I'll look into that and bring that back at the public hearing. Let's look at this.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, no.
Just a production, sorry, Daniel, a production facility, that includes land where it can be grown, right?
That's right.
Is there any issue, I mean, we don't have a whole lot of land, is there any issue that we are taking up land that otherwise could be used for food security and that type of thing? Because at UBCM, it's a big issue for some areas, and I don't know whether it's an issue for us.
Well, given that we don't have any food production on a commercial scale here, that I'm aware of, we have a couple of urban farms, but we don't have greenhouses. The inputs to grow this will be massive. The investment in the facility will be massive. The power needs will be huge. I was told 30,000 square feet is the minimum size to make it economically feasible. So we barely have enough parcels big enough to accommodate that, combined with the setbacks and the parking and all the other things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, thank you. So we probably will not see much of a production facility.
Not right away. So 4 bylaws for amendment. Those are in front of you. Happy to answer questions. Where we are in this process is right in the middle. Council, you're going to consider this. If you choose to move ahead, we're going to schedule a public hearing. We're going to send this to our commissions for comment. Public hearing will be in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. It'll get sent to the ministry for approval. Any changes, any revisions will be made. And the plan, with your support, is to adopt on October 11th. And we're ready for it.
Okay.
Very good. I can bring these motions forward, Your Worship. that zoning amendment bylaw number 2236 be read a first and second time and a public hearing be scheduled for Tuesday, October 9th.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor English. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Lando?
Your Worship, it might have been more appropriate when Mr. Sturgeon was doing the presentation over there. I just have a few questions, and it's an important policy piece to spend a little bit of time getting it right. I guess the first thing I want to say is I'm very pleased with the report. I think that staff has done a really good job in being thorough. They've explained really well the framework and the background and the context of what's going on here. They've also, with the consultant, have done surveying of the population and sort of confirmed to me a lot of what I think people are thinking about this. A lot of the decisions don't surprise me. We do have a few split votes, as Daniel put it, where people were pushing for one way or the other, and those are some decisions that we're going to be made here. Just some questions in general. I noticed that there are significant requirements for ventilation and security, that kind of stuff within the grow facilities. Seeing that there's quite a few areas that could be allowed in, I was wondering what the practical effect of those would be. Like, do these end up making these facilities like zero smell kind of grow operations, or what is your anticipated outcome of that?
I would need to look into that a little bit more, not having the experience on the process. I would check with our consultant. She would be more familiar with the best comparison right now is the medical production areas. But yes, the intent would be that there would be no order.
Well, it seems to me that these commercial growers that are indoor have charcoal filter ventilation systems that scrub out any smells going out, and if they don't, they get a whole bunch of complaints from the neighborhood. So I think that we should be looking at it, and I don't know, I don't really feel that there's going to be a huge uptake on commercial growing, but I think that we should have this in place so that it isn't a nuisance to the neighborhood.
We tried to remove ambiguity from the regulation process, whereby someone, it's wide open as to what the requirements are. There is a degree of ambiguity in that we require a report from someone who specializes in this matter, and then we'll assess the results of that report on a case-by-case basis. It can't mitigate the order.
Did you have other questions?
Your Worship, thank you. Yeah, I had another one. Sort of a two-party question, but both driving at the same thing. The flow chart that was presented, and as is outlined in the report, we're going to be receiving subsequent reports from the APC and the Community Economic Development Commission on their sort of feedback on it. One of my roles as councillor is representative to the Social Development Committee, and they, as is contained in the report here, they did make a number of recommendations. One of them in particular that is not, doesn't align with what's happening in the report here. So my question of staff is, given that we're still receiving some more reports and we still have a public hearing, we're still going through the process, I'm seeking advice on bringing forward, one of their recommendations, and it basically involves further restrictions on retailing, and where you see that would be the best place to sort of test council's desire to consider that restriction. Would that, do you think that would happen here or today, or would that be best to wait to get further input from APC and the Community Economic Development Commission on that?
There is a limit as to what can be taken into consideration after the public hearing, so I'm going to defer the procedural aspect of that question to Dawn.
So, Your Worship, I would ask which resolution are you referring to?
Okay. Yeah, the Social Development Committee asked for restrictions on highway commercial. So that was, and their rationale is that it would include, and when I was looking at the zoning map, many of the highway commercial are still included in permissible areas, and it's a significant amount too. So it's not a small change, it's a big change. So that's basically, I see it as my role to bring their concerns, because they represent, a whole spectrum of social development organizations, and that was one of their concerns around criminality and drinking and drug driving, I should call it, on a highway car-based sort of part of town.
So that, Your Worship, resolution was brought forward to the consultant
Okay.
and reviewed.
Yeah.
And the resolution in the end was with special consideration to look at prohibiting it on the highway, retail
Okay.
sales on the highway.
Okay.
That was also run through the RCMP, and the RCMP did not have a problem with it. So
Okay.
what staff has to do is weigh that with respect to the different perspectives.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that was addressed in our meeting, and Dan's got some more here.
Sure.
There, a similar example is a liquor store, and there's the Cheers liquor store at Best Western. You know, it will be an offense to drive your vehicle under the influence of this. That is an enforcement issue, that is a public awareness campaign as well. There's a number of locations, we looked at the C4 zone, there's a number of locations that face outward from the freeway towards the neighborhoods in that area. And those businesses don't just serve highway traffic, they also serve the community. And again, like Don said, we weighed those two and decided that it was not something that warranted restriction to avoid something that is perhaps unavoidable.
Councillor Nixon?
This was discussed at the Health Committee. Some of who sit on the Social Committee before it went to the Social Committee. And the Health Committee felt it was really relevant to the liquor store being over there on the Cheers. And that this is adult. These are adults. So, you know, I think we just need to watch what we're trying to do here and not completely eliminate that.
Mr. Chabot?
Your Worship and Council, I understand where Councillor Orlando's coming from with respect to the particulars of the regulation, but because we've been asked to do this on a compressed timeline, the ability to make change between now and the date of the public hearing and satisfy the statutory advertising requirements is pretty limited, because if council wants to tinker with minimum distance between retail locations, distance from certain facilities catering to children and youth, distances, you start altering use and density, which you're prohibited from doing after a public hearing. You can change other things. So if there was changes that were desirable in the eyes of council today with respect to the proximity of one cannabis retail outlet to another, the proximity of their location to parks and playgrounds and facilities catering to children and youth, we need to know what those changes are today so we could give the appropriate notice and validly have a public hearing. Otherwise, we won't have a regulatory framework in effect for October 17th.
I guess I'm a little bit confused then, because what's the difference between bringing something up today or somebody from the public coming at a public hearing and saying, I don't think that you should have cannabis smoking at Williams's Lake Campground because kids could be in the next campsite?
That would be a regulation in your clean air bylaw, which doesn't have a
So it's just
public
because of
hearing
the-
requirement. It's because of zoning.
So it's just
There's a statutory
specific-
prohibition of making a change to a zoning amendment bylaw that's had a public hearing that alters use or density, except you can reduce density with the landowner's consent.
So you're just making the comment in reference to,
To where they would be physically
retail.
able to be located.
okay, all right. Go ahead.
Your Worship, yeah, well, I guess within regard to this particular concern, I'm happy to hear that the RCMP have considered the issue because it was specifically the element of criminality around it. The Social Development Committee put together 4 or 5 different motions, and the rest of them are addressed within the bylaw. So is a process to weigh 857 plus opinions in there. There's going to be some compromises in there, so I'm happy to stand pat on this one.
Councilor Brothers?
And just in that regard, Daniel, with the buffer zones, how many could we possibly have along the highway?
In terms of retail,
Yeah.
and that's again based on availability of land, based on available commercial space, and these are all subject to an application process with the province, and then referral to council, and then you're again able to comment on the specific location of each one.
Okay. I want to go back to our first motion, which is zoning amendment bylaw and setting a public hearing date. And just want to remind council and the public that this is actually the second phase of what we did to introduce this cannabis regulations, where you remember we did a zoning amendment bylaw to prohibit sales in all zones, so that we could do the study, go out to the public, and now we're doing a public hearing to reintroduce them back through the zoning amendment bylaw. Any other comments on the first motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Second motion,
The business licensing and regulation amendment bylaw number 2237 be read a first, second, and third time.
Councilor Duke, seconded by Councilor Nixon. Discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. And because this is such a big ordeal, is that I'm not going to be restricting council to just questions on the motion or comments if they have it to do with generalization of the whole cannabis. That's fine. I'm looking for motion number 3.
The fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2238 be read a first, second, and third time.
Motion by Councilor Duke, seconded by Councilor English. Any comments? All those in favor? Motion's carried.
Motion 4, the clean air amendment bylaw number 2239 be read a first, second, and third time.
Motion by Councilor Duke, seconded by Councilor Sauls. Discussion? All those in favor? Motion's carried.
And lastly, the council report, the bylaw titled Cannabis Regulatory Framework dated September 18, 2018, be referred to the Economic Development Commission and Advisory Planning Commission to review and provide a written response by September 25, 2018.
Motion by Councilor Duke, seconded by Councilor English. Discussion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sturgeon, and please pass on our thanks to the consultants that worked on this. It was a very good, thorough report, and I was glad to see the level of participation from the community as well. Councilor Lando.
Oh, sorry, yeah, that's right. I have a conflict declaration on item, sorry, I thought I was raising my glass too over there.
I wanted to have a cheers. Is that what you thought?
Yeah, I have a conflict declaration on item 11A due to a business relationship with the proponent.
Anybody prepared to make a motion? Councilor Nixon.
That a grant in aid of $2,000 be awarded to the Revelstoke Cattle Sport Association, and the grant takes the form of a credit to be used against the cost of pool rental at the Aquatic Center for their weekly pool sessions from March to May 2019, and that such credit has no cash value.
Motion by Councilor Nixon, seconded by Councilor English. Comments, discussion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. We're on 11B.
Your Worship, I'll bring that forward. At the purchase of a 2018 cat loader 930M, including attachments and warranty, be approved in the amount of $248,336.78, less a $39,000 trade for the net purchase price of $209,336.78 plus taxes.
Motion by Councilor Sauls. Seconder is Councilor Brothers. Discussion on the motion. I'm assuming that this is something that we put into our capital plan, and it's because it's over spending limit is why it comes to this table for approval.
Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any other comments or discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Anybody want to bring anything, do anything with the correspondence from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business? Is there anybody who would like to bring something up about the business license summary of August 2018? RCMP Community Policing Report of July 2018? Bylaw compliance summary of August 2018? check requisition report of August 2018. Questions from media? Jocelyn? Looking for a motion pursuant to section 90.1 C and G of the community charter to go in, 90.1A, 90.1 to go in camera. Councillor English, Councillor Sauls, all in favor, motion's carried.